welcome to the Emancipated Citizen podcast, where two human rights activists bring to you some of the stories of the bravest men and women out there, fighting against authoritarianism and repression for their individuality, for a more free and just world. Today, it's just going to be the two of us talking about recent developments of when it comes to repression and arrests in Saudi Arabia, especially as it pertains to anonymous users of social media in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We might start a little bit with the history of repression in our country, and move on to the consolidation of power that led by Mohammed bin Salman, as he was named the Crown Prince. We are going to be talking about international actors that may or may not have had a role to play in this consolidation of power, how Saudis live their day-to-day lives differently now. I am going to make the argument that Saudi Arabia is a far more dangerous and repressive place than it was like 10 years ago. We are going to talk specifically about the United States' influence, what the Trump administration brought to Saudi Arabia and its state of repression, what Biden's promises of I guess making Saudi Arabia a pariah state, demanding the release of prisoners, how a lot of those power dynamics kind of changed with the Russia-Ukraine war, and how Saudi Arabia has been able to basically do whatever it wants and advertise whatever it wants with impunity as far as diplomacy goes. I mean, public opinion is a completely different thing, and we're going to talk about PR campaigns and sports washing and tourism and advertising as well. So, yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, I mean, we don't need to go very far back in the history of the Saudi state. It goes back hundreds of years. There were multiple Saudi states that have had conquest campaigns around the Arabian Peninsula, and a lot has happened since the 1800s. But let's talk about the history of the state since 1924, where Ibn Saud has conquered the whole peninsula, and a new order of power was established, where you have the king, you have his sons, and the other members of the royal family below him, and this royal family is connected to the other powerful tribes in the region, who had a lot more of a say before the Saudis had this much power. After that, the House of Saud was connected to the other important families and tribes through marriage mainly. It is fairly well known, especially for people who have lived in the country, for people who I guess are into Arabic literature, and so especially more recent literature from the Arabian Peninsula. One will notice that all kinds of unique or divergent expressions of intellectual unfolding have been treated with the utmost brutality, and for that reason, you will find that important thinkers of the 20th century from the Arabian Peninsula have either been active abroad. You have like some of the very very important, the very prominent examples of that. You have Abdullah al-Qahtani, who was the first well-known atheist thinker from Saudi Arabia at this time. He was actually able to publish in places like Lebanon and Egypt, which unfortunately is less than conceivable, or I suppose less conceivable and less safe nowadays, even in those regions. where Islamists have gained much more of a hold on power. Another important novelist or author from from the peninsula was Abdurrahman Munif, who, yeah, he was a novelist. He wrote about the Saudi conquest and the tribal experiences of a lot of the people who went through that. And more recently, you have people like Raif Badawi who openly called for a reform for religious freedom in the country and so on, and has been, well, initially sentenced to death, imprisoned for 10 years. More recently released, and well, after an assassination attempt and a lot of international pressure that has been mentioned, was released with another 10-year travel ban, unable to see his family. So all of that is to say basically that Saudi Arabia sure has never been known as a very open society, as a very free society, as a very safe society for people who want to unfold freely intellectually and exchange ideas on a free basis. And for a very long time, Saudi Arabia has also been known as basically the only state with this sort of absolute monarchy, the only state where women were not allowed to drive cars. It was very widely criticized, mainly about the as far as the male guardianship system goes, where women are not allowed to get jobs, they're not allowed to travel without a male guardian's permission. This whole public perception has been something that, yeah, that's understandably scared foreigners away from investing in the country, from going to the country. It was a level of repression as far as women go, as far as the LGBT community goes, as far as non-Muslim goes, and so on. Kind of seen as something of a monstrosity, something of a serious danger that you don't want to get close to. Now, in like between 2015 2018, after Mohammed bin Salman was named the crown prince by his father, King Salman, who was himself crowned, I believe, in 2015. Mohammed bin Salman made very consistent efforts to rehabilitate the image of the state within recent years, right? Things that were kind of very well known about Saudi Arabia that would come to mind to people both within and outside the country. Things like movie theaters and music and women driving being banned. Those are the most obvious things. Initiatives were taken to lift those restrictions, right? So that yeah, the world would feel better about the state of the country. People would invest more. People would come more. There was a new tourism program which had not existed before. Right, we're having concerts. Women are allowed to get driver's licenses. Finally, we have movie theaters. You see women without headscarves or veils walking in public. The image that kind of meets the Western or the global view of this shift would understandably be that Saudi Arabia got this new, young, forward-thinking leader and has become a modern state. Right? They're no longer this backwards uh, tribal, like Islamist structure where, yeah, everything's like closed, women are covered up, no theaters, no music, no driving, so on. Also, Arabia has now changed. It's a modern state. Ben, is that something that you've kind of been following on the outside, say from the years 2015 to 2020? what were your first impressions of those developments?
I mean, my view is going to be very different from other Americans because there's this guy you might have heard of named Zacaalrayyis who tells me an awful lot about Saudi Arabia.
True enough.
But no, something I've observed is how a lot of Western media goes, "Oh, look how great Saudi Arabia's doing! They legalized women driving in 2012." But don't mention it. But act like it's a good it's impressive that they legalized women driving in 2012.
2017.
17, even worse. What was legalized in 2012? Must have been something.
What did happen in 2012? I mean, the campaign has been ongoing for women's driving, and just to touch on this one point, when it comes to women's driving, there have been ongoing campaigns since like the early 1990s, even earlier. The more media effective campaigns have been going on for a very, very long time. And sure, when some of the women were seen as being too disruptive, gaining too much attention, sometimes they were arrested, they were imprisoned for a certain amount of time, and they were effectively silenced. But that didn't happen to all of them. Didn't happen to everybody who demonstrated, to every woman who drove a car. It wasn't as much of a risk. And as far as things like social media go, a lot of women, a lot of men, a lot of people in general were openly discussing those issues, were making demands of the government that, yeah, it's about time that this changes, that women finally gain this freedom, right? You even had discussions on television, having open pro contra kind of uh, back and forth about those things. So having an opinion that yeah goes against the flow of the nation was not as big of a risk as I would say it is nowadays, which we will get to. Like I said, a big part of this episode is going to be about social media use and anonymous activism. But
And my
one,
point
yeah,
though,
go on.
was just the way a lot of Western media was talking about Saudi Arabia liberalizing policies, and just kind of ignoring that it's things that happen in Saudi Arabia a century after it happened in the rest of the world. It just strikes me as paid articles.
I suppose you can look at it that way, but I mean to offer a counterpoint to this, it's never truly too late to do what you were supposed to do 10 years ago or 100 years ago, and late is better than never. In itself, I I don't have a problem seeing this development of women are finally able to drive as a positive development, as something that yeah, that is to be viewed positively, and under circumstances, even the actors that have pushed towards this change to be praised because of it, and given that credit in a sense. But I think the bigger problem is that there is a dark side of those developments that a lot of people are not aware of, and is in the bigger picture a lot more causes a lot more harm to the civil rights situation, the women's rights situation in the country, than the good that might come out of something like this small legal change here. Because within a couple of months' distance from the royal decree to finally allow women to drive, all of the prominent women and men who have campaigned for this issue were arrested, were basically at first made to disappear, kidnap. They were put to trial under special criminal anti-terrorism courts, right? They were smeared all over the national media as being foreign agents and traitors to the country. They have been publicly accused of getting millions from foreign entities and nations to damage the country's reputation. They have been beaten and tortured, sexually assaulted in prison. They've been threatened. Their families have been they have been banned from traveling. Um, some of those people, like including Lujan al-Hadlul, Iman al-Finjan, and a lot others, really had to suffer the worst of the consequences from this. And I think a very important message that the government wants to send here is that yeah, just because we're giving you those specific rights does not mean that we're responsive to civil demands from demands does not mean that we're responsive to demands from civil society, and it does not mean that we are going to have this s- slippery slope of civil rights, so to speak, right? I mean, it is something that you interestingly enough hear conservatives talk about a lot, where, oh, you give those people this set of rights, they're gonna go on and demand the next set of rights. Like, we give women the right to drive, the next day they're gonna be demanding the right to travel without a guardian, then they're gonna be demanding to get a job without a guardian, and so on. And yes, this is how this is how civil rights struggles work, and within a democratic society this should not be an issue. But yeah, within, like, if you want to maintain a totalitarian society, then finally cracking to the pressure of the people and giving them rights that they have been denied for such a long time needs to come with a deterrent that this does not mean you're allowed to demand even more rights, and we're gonna punish you for demanding the rights that we're now acknowledging that you deserve, right? This has been a big part of this strategy there, and it has been something that has discouraged civil society activity within the country. Within the same time period, civil society groups like Hasm, who were actually like, they were not oppositionalists, they were not anti-religious, they weren't anti-monarchy or anything in that sense. They were an organization that was supposed to push forward the state of law within Saudi Arabia, and draw attention not to the public but to the people in charge to things like arbitrary arrests and things like torture and complaints from prisoners. They would do things like write letters to princes and governors on behalf of prisoners, and this was kind of their work, basically. A lot of lobbying for prisoners, a lot of demands for rule of law, court justice, and so on. And the leaders of this movement, of course, the leaders of Hasm, Abdullah al-Hamid, Muhammad Fahid al-Qahtani, uh, and others were imprisoned. Some of them ended up dying in prison. Abdullah al-Hamid, most notably, the most prominent of this group, a founding member of the civil society, died due to medical neglect in uh, in a Saudi prison, where he was an older man with pre-existing medical issues, which which the state knew about, which it was well known that that he needed certain medications regularly and was not provided with the medical care that he needs, and ended up dying. And this was a whole orchestrated campaign. Like, we're talking about civil society actors right now, of course. We'll get to the businessmen and the princes and the other actors that were cracked down upon. Yeah, a large part of it was, yeah, basically, your rights are what we kind of determine that they are, and a public discussion and public demands and things like that, they're not going to work with us, and they're going to have the worst of consequences. And yeah, this was the most dangerous precedent and the most dangerous consequence of this power evolution, so to speak. Within within that time, 2015, 2018, and so on. Then yeah.
But yeah, what strikes me the most is how they're saying we don't want. What next? Will women get jobs and be able to travel abroad without a guardian? It's almost like they're afraid that the women will all leave if they continue letting people gain more rights.
Yeah, I mean, it is a it I- it is a very difficult situation to navigate for them, because yeah, obviously, on the one hand, it was not tenable to keep this ban on women driving indefinitely, but also, if you don't have the proper civil society mechanisms to for women to demand and regain their rights and live dignified lives, then of course they're going to do whatever they can to leave the country, right? Like, you either keep giving them rights, in which case it's going to be easier for them to leave, or you don't give them any rights, and the dissatisfaction is going to grow even more, both abroad and within the country. And you're not going to have investors, you're not going to have your PR, you're not going to have your tourists, and the liberal thinkers within the country are going to be much more reluctant to speak on your behalf. So it's like a lose-lose situation for them in that sense. I think one thing that's kind of become clear is that there is a certain slippery slope that is inevitable, despite the increased amount of repression that has um, that has been imposed on the Saudi people during this time. People have nonetheless been demanding the end of the guardianship system, the end of uh, the veiling mandates and things like that. Like, nowadays, officially, Saudi women don't even need a guardian's permission to leave the country as long as they're over 21, even though in practice that's very different sometimes. And so things are progressing in a certain social sense at an unexpected rate. In another sense, people's political expression, people's cultural, religious expression, and so on, is being repressed to a level that it has not been repressed to for a very, very long time. Ultimately, it does seem like we're in a situation where there is a move from this theocratic Islamist totalitarian state to a totalitarian state that is kind of still discovering its identity, for lack of a better expression there.
Yeah,
Uh,
but it's really possible to maintain a monarchy without some amount of theocracy to support it.
yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, and I think it's something that that history will show, that future events are going to show, and I think you have a very good point, and I think you're right. I mean, the current regime in Saudi Arabia is alienating everybody. in a way that I believe that a previous guest of ours has said that, to paraphrase Mehdi, that the religious people are constantly paranoid that they're too religious and that they're going to be targeted for that, and the people who aren't religious are constantly paranoid that they're going to be targeted for not being religious enough. And you have the religious minorities, which are anyway like both here and there at the same time. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
the liberals in the country are definitely not are not singing the praises of Mohammed bin Salman nowadays, and in especially in in connection to, yeah, the consolidation of power 2018, the imprisonment, the torture, the theft of princes, businessmen, a lot of important people in the country, the assassination of journalists, the assassination attempts on former government officials abroad, the imprisonment and torture of feminists and women's rights activists. I mean, those are things that's yeah, even the more prominent liberals in the country be will not stand behind, and yeah, those people are have mostly suffered the consequences of their speech, and have been imprisoned, tortured, taught the lesson by the Saudi regime now. And so yeah, what
Yeah.
expectation is somebody going to reasonably have of liberals who are supporting the MBS regime just as little as as religious conservatives would. So
That's not
it does
actually
it
what I
does
meant,
seem
though.
like it is. What did you mean?
I mean, is it really possible to claim that a single family has the right to rule a whole country without saying they have some sort of God given right to do it?
I mean, I think what I said is actually not entirely irrelevant to your question,
Yeah.
because the way that things are seen there is basically
Yeah.
that the royal family kind of act as guardians to the true interpretation of like Wahhabi Islam. And so um
Yeah.
and s- and so if that legitimation is no longer relevant, then the religious conservatives are not going to see the point of it. They're not going to actively support the regime, and really the only reason that people are going to have to keep working with with the House of Saud would be yeah, cynical motives, as one would say, where either they're motivated by money or by fear, like by reward and punishment and things like that. I'm gonna go to prison if I don't say this. I'm gonna get this much money if I say that, and so on. And this has for a long time also been a part of the model that they operate on. I mean, look at the various royal families in the Emirates, for example. They are far less reliant on this religious legitimation. They're basically more reliant on this mafia style rule of you know like, we're stronger than you. You're gonna do what we say or else. And I think as long as this dynamic holds, the Saudi regime could survive. Um, but once they're running out of money, once once they're like, the Islamic Republic, for example, where they're running out of space for prisoners and they're telling people to leave the country. Once they stop being able to pay off so many people to express support for them and stay in line, then I can very easily imagine having a situation that's not dissimilar from Iran now. Right. Um,
Similar to Iran in what
yeah.
way?
In the sense that the government doesn't really have any legitimacy outside of the force that they're able to impose on the people. They really rule with an iron fist, with like they rule with fear. Fear is their main tool of maintaining power. Where like that's always been some part of the Saudi model, but it's I don't think it has ever been like the entire game plan for any dictatorial regime at all. That you kind of need a carrot and a stick. You kind of need, you know, you can terrorize your people, but you have to also um, give them like positive reasons to support you, ideological reasons, and so on. And on that front, they seem to be slowly losing that. And I mean, maybe if they maintain a constant flow of money, it's still questionable because they're not the Emirates, they're not Qatar. They have a much larger population. You do have a number of Saudis, like a lot of Saudis actually, that still live in poverty. You can't send everyone in early retirement and let everybody live in a mansion in that way, because yeah, you do have the population of an actual country and not like a little island like Qatar, which yeah, that's a
Yeah.
completely different story.
Especially when the birth rate is 6 children per woman.
Yeah, that's pretty high. Yeah, it has a very young population. Taxes are rising, right? That's another very important point, because for a long time it's been like kind of an understanding that okay, we don't have a say in the political decisions. We leave those things to the royal family, and in exchange we're kind of provided with all of those public services and sometimes direct monetary help and things like that. And Saudi citizens do not have to pay taxes, income taxes, value-added taxes, and so on. More recently, that has been changing. You have income tax, you have like much higher value-added taxes. Gas prices have, like in the last 10 years, have gone up like 3 times, like it or like tripled the price that they were 10 years ago.
And
It's
what are they at now?
it's like 2 to 3 riyals, or around 70 US cents per liter. It's I know it's pretty cheap in comparison to most countries. We're still right.
Yeah, so
It
70 cents per
Just
liter, that
consider
would
the
be
fact that
something
it
like
used to be like
$3 a gallon. That's less than what we pay in the US, but not that much less.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like 10 years ago, it was like 2 3, like it was definitely like less than 50% of that, and significantly less actually. Yeah, digressing from today's topic. So moving on within the scope of the new MBS regime and how it has been doing things differently from previous Saudi governments. I think one very interesting element that's been a very significant part of their operation has had to do with dealings with foreign governments and getting support behind closed doors from foreign governments and entities. Okay, in 2017, um, the nation saw the biggest consolidation of power in its history. Right, Mohammed bin Salman basically ordered the rounding up and imprisonment of uh, a few hundred. princes and businessmen and of the richest and most powerful people in the country. In the Ritz-Carlton, there were reports that some of them were tortured. Most of them were deposed of all of or most of their wealth. It would seem that that certain information was kind of gained about them, possibly from foreign entities. More like very importantly, I think Mohammed bin Naif, who was the previous crown prince, who was deposed of all of his positions, who was basically quite humiliated in front of the whole nation and lost his place of power within Saudi defense and internal security. This event, very interestingly, happened a few months after Trump's inauguration as president and his first state visit as president to Saudi Arabia. The Trump administration has always spoken very positively of the Saudi regime. It was very unusual for Trump's first state visit to be to Saudi Arabia. The fact that this
Yeah,
consolidation happened just a few months after this first visit does raise quite a few questions. At the time, there have also been stories about Jared Kushner being basically deposed of his security clearance, and some like high-profile intelligence people being shocked by something and kind of making rash moves to exclude him. A lot of the information at that point was less than clear, I would say, right? The more we kind of learned about the Trump administration and its inner workings, and especially like what's been happening after Trump left office, a lot of questions are left open, right? Like, why was Trump's first state visit to Saudi Arabia, right? That's very unusual. Is it a
I mean, I
coincidence that less
suspect
than a
part
year
of it is
later?
because he completely alienated the two countries that traditionally are the first state visits of a new president. That is Canada
I
and
mean,
Mexico.
sure, but I mean, sure, but I mean, then you have a lot of like, what about Israel? What about like Europe and the UK? And I mean, there like you don't just like go to Saudi Arabia as like make them your number one ally in this sense for no reason, right? Like there were so many options to to choose from when, and this is a very unusual choice.
Yeah, I mean,
And yeah, I
I
mean, is
think
it a
he
coincidence
alienated the
that
Europeans
less
too.
than a
But
I mean, he alienates like I don't know, he alienates everyone in some sense. I still think it's a very open question. I know you might disagree slightly with me on this, but I mean, the fact that the nation's biggest crackdown and consolidation of power happened just a few months after that does raise a few questions, and it's an open question that I think needs to be answered. Right. Also, do you know where Jared Kushner was on January 6th of 2021?
I mean, before you sent me the outline for this episode, I did not. But yes, he was in
Okay.
Saudi Arabia.
Yep, he was in Riyadh. He was meeting with MBS.
Yeah,
And
I
then
mean, I imagine there's a lot of reasons for all the connections between
uh,
Trump and
yeah,
MBS, but no, I think at some level, I think Trump would like to do something similar to what MBS did. He certainly is an ego giant enough to want to establish a royal family in the U.S. He
oh,
never
definitely,
could.
definitely. With the way that things are going in the U.S. right now, and honestly, the fact that he hasn't, like, that he's still a free man, he's still able to speak publicly and still able to commit stochastic terrorism on a very regular basis. Uh, it's like 2015, everybody was laughing at the very notion of the idea of Trump being elected as president, and now that it's almost like it's he's being so ambitious, so bold in a way that everybody's like just looking in shock and no, this can't be real. No, and what once you take action to stand in the way of this danger to democracy, you're kind of acknowledging the realness of this danger, which it seems like nobody wants to do. Right? I mean, also connected to this, the secret documents that Trump stole upon his leaving office, after like being ordered to return them on multiple occasions, after being threatened with prosecution. He was still very insistent and tried to hide a lot of them, and um, actually, yeah, had to be raided for that in the end, and there's still a legal proceeding going on against him. Why was he so insistent on keeping those documents, and why did he steal them in the first place? I mean, I've heard a lot of
Yeah.
commentary, about, especially like from, I guess, the more liberal side of the media, where Trump, he likes to brag. He he kept them for, basically, to brag about having state secrets and all of that. He he likes to show things off. He wants to keep them as memorabilia, as kind of souvenirs. He's just too stupid to realize that he's doing something wrong or illegal. I mean, I I don't really buy any of that. I mean, what he did was very serious, and there has to be a good reason for
Yeah.
like,
Oh no, it gets worse than
in the
that
sense
though.
of like there has to be a purpose for this. And I think, like, given the risk that he's put himself in by, yeah, by committing those crimes, I think he's gambling on something.
Yeah.
He's betting on winning something major from that, and especially considering the, we know that there have been like strategic information about Iran's defenses, for example, among those documents. Saudi Arabia's chief, uh, rival in the region, um, right? You had you had nuclear
Yeah.
secrets. You
Zach,
had,
you're missing something
like,
extremely important though. The
tell me.
Trump's behavior with the documents, the unusual part about it isn't that
Hmm.
he took classified documents home. That was actually turned out to be very common. Biden did it too, as a senator. The unusual part was that he was keeping them in a
If it's part of
bathroom
your job,
in hmm? Yeah,
if
no.
it's
The
part of
unusual
your
part is
job,
that he was
sure. I
keeping
mean,
them.
if
It's not the job of a senator to be bringing those papers home, though. And they never should have been brought home, but it was commonplace because nobody thought about somebody walking into a senator's house and taking it. But Trump was putting them in the bathroom of a golf course that was publicly accessible. And if not publicly accessible, worse, accessible by diplomat type people who are very often spies. Even if I wouldn't be able to afford to go in there, a diplomat who's probably also a spy could. That was the big problem. But a few months ago, either Nancy Pelosi or Dianne Feinstein's husband was attacked in their house. And I think that's going to also be a big clue that's going to make
yeah,
senders stop bringing stuff home after their home got broken into. And I mean, it was an attempted assassination, well, attempted kidnapping, if not assassination. But if somebody can break into a prominent senator's or the Speaker of the House's home, they can break into steal documents they brought home too, and now it's not going to be ignored. But it was commonplace for decades for important people to be bringing important documents home, expecting that they wouldn't be robbed.
I get that. I get that. But I mean, there is something very unusual about this specifically because here's the thing: like, even if you are formally not supposed to bring those classified documents home, um, it, the content of those documents, if you are a senator, if you are a president, the and working through this content is part of your job, and you may be kind of told to, okay, do this in the office or whatever, but if it's more convenient to work at home, whatever, it might be a legal gray area, or yeah, whatever it is, but uh, the point is you're still doing that for the purpose of doing your job, but it's different when you take those documents when you're, okay, you're leaving office, and the state is actively ordering you to return them, right? And like you're not using them anymore. You're being threatened
Yeah.
with legal prosecution, and also like you're not being very discreet about them. You're showing them off. So what is all of this about? Is it just an ego thing of, oh, look at what an important person I am, or is it, hey, like, this is kind of a low-key way of advertising that maybe your bosses can buy this off, or but I have a lot of secret state information that I could sell to some very important people internationally.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, it could
I think
definitely be
that's,
both.
I mean, it is certainly at a different scale. I think you would agree. It's different if you hold office, you have a few documents. Oh, you forgot them at home. The state asks you to please return them. You return them. It's no big deal. You have like this volume of it. You refuse to return anything. You keep showing them off. You keep bragging about them. You keep compromising national security in that sense. I think there is a very legitimate question to be asked about, like, are you are you acting as a foreign agent here? Um are you gaining something by compromising the national security in that way? Because yeah, legally there is even a difference, right, between somebody who's just stupid and doesn't know when to shut up, and somebody who's actively betraying their country and selling their state secrets, or sharing their state secrets to um, foreign powers. And then there's
Yeah.
let's go to the next question. Okay, what did Jared do to receive $2 billion from the Saudi sovereign wealth fund? Like after Trump left office. I mean, none of this is usual.
No, I think what
Even
he
like
did
even
was,
people on his side of politics in the U.S. was, this is highly unethical. It's highly questionable. It does raise a lot of open questions. Do go on.
yeah. No, I mean, I think there's also probably multiple factors going into it, but I'm sure him trying to get the peace deals that'll be in the, well, not necessarily Saudi Arabia's favor, but the Saud's favor, is probably part of it, and at some level they might be betting on him being able to get the best return on an investment because of his connections, which is absolutely corrupt, but corrupt in a slightly different manner than it being a bribe. But I mean, I'm sure if part of the reasoning for giving him $2 billion was that his connections would allow him to invest it well, I don't believe that it wasn't at least partially a bribe. And
No,
ultimately,
I think
I mean, and ultimately, I would say even if Trump gets a stroke tomorrow, some member of his clan is probably going to run for president in the future. I don't know how many people sharing the memes are Russians, but there are a lot of people sharing memes of just showing the next presidents for the next 50 years being members of the Trump family. That could easily just be Russians trying to be provocative, though. And it could just be that the House of Saud wants to maintain a relationship with the House of Trump because they think they'll be in power again in the future too, which is probably even worse than it being nothing more than a payoff.
I think this is probably an important part of it. Yeah. Just to get back to the point of maybe they thought there would be the best return on investment there. No, I don't buy that at all because, like the advisors, the board of directors of the National Sovereign Wealth Fund were overwhelmingly opposed to this kind of investment. Jared Kushner does not have the best track record. Yeah, I'm not a financial expert, but I mean there were definitely people basically in line there who had better track records, who the financial advisors would have judged as being better options to invest the money in. Like $2 billion is an insane amount of money. Also, there was like an excessive management fee that Jared himself was to be paid off directly, something in the a few hundred thousands, if I'm not mistaken. I think each question here by itself doesn't necessarily paint a very clear picture, and it's still not entirely clear what all of this means. I think it probably means something. What exactly it means, we're not entirely sure. I mean, yeah, we don't have any definitive answers to those questions, right? But a growing amount of questions around this seem to paint a picture of some very serious crimes. I think one could reasonably speculate that Trump and Kushner may have been receiving payments to deliver classified state information to MBS and his about his critics and political opponents and about other states in the region, like Iran, for example, right? If that is the case, then Trump is responsible for the 2017-18 crackdown, for the imprisonment, torture, death of countless Saudi citizens, the imprisonment and torture of the women's rights activist Lujain Hathloul, Nouf Abdelaziz, Iman Finjan, among many, many others, for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And this would not only compromise the US integrity and national security, prove to be crimes of espionage and treason at the highest possible level, right? But would involve significant dangers to international security and stability, crimes against humanity and the people of Saudi Arabia. I mean, a functioning democracy needs to have safety rails against this level of corruption. I'm talking about the US here. More pressingly, against fascists using democracy as a means to the end of consolidating power and ultimately dismantling the democracy, right? Such people should be barred from ever taking political process in a functioning democracy. And the US Constitution does have guardrails against this, right? I personally dread the thought of Trump ever becoming presidency again, what that will do to my country, let alone the United States and the international community as a whole. So it's very personally important to me to see Trump and his conspirators thoroughly investigated and face consequences for their crimes. We're not entirely clear how severe those crimes were, but we know that some very serious crimes were committed. There just definitely needs to be more investigation to see just how big a deal this is. Do you think this is a bit of a reach on my side?
No, I don't think it's a reach, but I think ultimately the whole Trump phenomenon is the symptom, not a cause.
Okay, would you elaborate?
It's a sign of several different problems. I mean, the rising tide of anti-intellectualism. I don't imagine Trump could ever happen if there wasn't this wide strain of anti-intellectualism going around, and is partially driven by just lives here not being as good as they were 30 years ago. I mean, the number of hours anyone has to work to afford a house is now completely insane. And that's driving people to go towards counter elites instead of elites. You couldn't find a better picture of a counter elite than the Trump administration. The number of people there who have Harvard degrees and just are the nuttiest of ethno nationalists. And then just the way lobbying has changed in the US. I mean, Trump and Saudi Arabia, it's stunning, but it's not unique. The Biden's son getting a job at a Ukrainian gas company. I mean, as much as I support Ukraine, that was certainly sounded like a payoff. And in the case of Ukraine, they're lobbying the U.S. government to not be run over by Russia. It's not the same as what Saudi Arabia is doing. It's not. They're not trying to enforce their will on other countries. They just want to keep Russia out of their own country. But Ukraine, I heard Ukraine was one of the biggest foreign countries lobbying the U.S. government before the war broke out. And ultimately, that is
And
all based
understandably
on their
so,
position
yeah.
with Russia.
Yeah, I mean, that's very understandable. If
The amount of foreign lobbying happening in the US has been completely out of control. The amount of domestic lobbying is also completely out of control. Obama had a plan to not hire any lobbyists in his administration, and that forced him to not hire a bunch of people he really should have hired up to the cabinet level because it's just so common you can't find people for cabinet office positions who haven't lobbied. And it gets even worse, too. There's a running joke that all the think tanks are owned by the Arabian Peninsula, whether Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or the UAE, or probably Kuwait for that matter.
I mean, an issue with lobbying. I mean, it's a very important part of a democracy and a functioning republic in that sense. And citizens and
Oh no.
interest groups absolutely should have the right to lobby their government. But I mean, the way that the system is set up, especially in the U.S., is very prone to corruption. So yeah, this point about
Yeah,
Obama, I completely understand, and maybe
yeah,
trying to exclude lobbyists. Yeah, maybe not the way to go. Maybe you want to
yeah.
reform the way that lobbying works in that country.
No, and I don't mean that lobbying is happening. I've lobbied my representatives before. No, I mean that you have paid lobbyists, and there's some of the richest people in the country. That is a huge problem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Even as far as paid lobbyists goes, I mean, yeah, there's an insane amount of corruption there, but I also think that like I have on a volunteer level kind of worked in lobbying as well, right? I have talked to representatives in the Bundestag. I have brought them to support certain campaigns that have to do with pressuring the Saudi government. I mean, and my point here is that I would very much have liked to do more of this. There was more funding for this kind of thing because your time as a human being does cost money, and you can't spend way too much time on something. Yeah, that's not paying your bills in that sense. So I even understand the yeah, the need for paid lobbyists. Yeah, as far as you have the issues of campaign contributions and so on, which that's a whole complicated topic that's not that relevant to today's episode, right? I think that the Trump administration has had a very big role in empowering this current Saudi regime, and it is pretty shameful. I think representatives, even people in those places in the U.S. and places like Israel, which we're going to get to very shortly as well, should feel personally responsible and should be taking direct action towards holding their government representatives accountable. What does it say about American values and the integrity of your country's democracy if it is actively propping up dictators who are assassinating journalists in foreign consulates and arresting anonymous online activists and making excuses for them?
Oh, the founders are turning over in their graves. They've been turning over in their graves for a long time. Washington ended his second term with a speech that said America must not go abroad in search of foreign monsters to slay. But in the same time, we must always be on the side of people seeking liberty. And now both halves of that have been fucked up.
Yep, absolutely agree. As Trump's administration was coming to an end and Trump was going on his campaign trail, a lot of us were extremely optimistic about Biden's effect on this dynamic, potentially, and his promises to put pressures on the Saudi government to release certain prisoners, for example.
I knew at the time nothing's going to trump the oil. The oil isn't
Yeah,
coming here, but it needs to go on the market, or everything everyone in the US wants becomes impossible.
yeah, he kind of made those unrealistic promises, I suppose, of making Saudi Arabia a pariah state. I mean, at the beginning, I was like, I don't think I'm naive enough to kind of buy all of a politician's promises like wholesale in that sense, but to be fair, he did come through on some of what he promised. And at the very beginning of his administration, he did put a lot of pressure on the Saudi state to release Lujain al-Hadlul, most notably some other women's rights activists, right, from prison. I mean, they're still banned from traveling. They're still in the country, but that has set a very important and very strange precedent, to be honest, because basically the leader of the free world standing behind this women's rights act, this icon of our nation, who has campaigned and successfully gotten her out of prison, and right now she is, although trapped in the country, she is talking about the rights of like domestic servers. She's not being openly critical of the government, but she's definitely engaging in the public discussion, talking about advancing women's rights in the region, and that is pretty amazing. That she's able to express herself in that way, especially like on Twitter, for example, and not face the consequences that other people would face nowadays. Not to take away any
Yeah.
credit or admiration from her, it is still incredibly brave and they are still unpredictable, but so far, she has been able to express herself in ways that nobody else in the country is able to. Like, I definitely commend Joe Biden for that, and I think he has done a great service to our country by doing that, and this is something that I think we should be very thankful for.
Oh no, Biden and Obama were both knew the right thing about the House of Saud. Biden, when he was running, referred to Saudi Arabia as our so-called ally. They both know what the human rights situation is. They both consider it unacceptable. It's just because of the oil that just limits what they can do. If there have been many times when Biden would call and the phone didn't even get picked up. But ultimately,
Yeah.
if Biden did decide to go in big for every Saudi dissident and to cause the House of Saud to dramatically cut their oil exports, that would completely screw Ukraine. And it gets worse than just Ukraine. Russia is already talking about taking Alaska back. I mean, they're state-run propagandists. Putin isn't saying it in a speech at the UN or anything, but they're already talking about taking Alaska back, and we can't sacrifice Ukraine if there's a chance it'll mean Russia will go for Alaska later. Not that it's remotely likely that they could take anything, but even the attempt could be a disaster.
I mean, I agree with you that Ukraine should be a non-negotiable issue in U.S. foreign policy, but it is like there is a very tragic side to that, which is that the beginning of the Biden presidency, there was a lot of leverage on the U.S. side that was able to lead to those amazing changes. And once Putin attacked, once Russian oil was less accessible to the world market, they became suddenly a lot more dependent on Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia suddenly had a lot more leverage to do whatever they want. Ben, do you have any more points to make about Biden, or shall we move on to Israel?
Israel, as it relates to Saudi Arabia.
No, mainly I wanted to talk about the NSO group, Israeli spyware being sold to the Saudi state, and the resulting animal wave of arrests, like this new form of repression that Saudi citizens even more have to be even more careful in their use of digital media.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just
So
comes down to Netanyahu being I don't know if I want to call a Jew a fascist, but Netanyahu also being an authoritarian who can't follow the law of the country he's supposed to be leading.
Yeah, no, Netanyahu is endangering potentially everybody in the Middle East, and especially Israel and their reputation and pride as being the only functional democracy in the Middle East, the place where people have human rights and so on. I mean, this is eroding as well, very unfortunately. Something also very notable in this context is that the Saudi regime has been more and more publicly and approaching Israel and making deals with Israel and cooperating with Israel. I do think that there is an argument to be made that Saudi Arabia and Israel are natural geopolitical allies given the state of their grounding and how after the Second World War and after the drawing of the border and most of the other Arab nations had there was a dominance in Ba'athist ideology, pan-Arabism, anti-Western and anti-Israeli sentiment, whereas Saudi Arabia, very similarly to Israel, was only able to develop and be propped up at its early history through the help of the US and the UK. So relations that are not entirely public have probably existed in some form or another for a very long time, but now yeah, you have those normalization deals, and more importantly, and like an even older fact about this is that Saudi Arabia has been contracting the NSO group, been using the Pegasus spyware to hack into the phones of high profile human rights activists. Omar bin Abdulaziz, I believe he was an acquaintance of Jamal Khashoggi's, who Amnesty International's security lab has basically been found to have his phone compromised by this software. Is basically has access to everything on your phone, anything that is end to end encrypted, like on WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, anything like that would be compromised on your end, right? Because they would have direct access to your phone. They would have access to the microphone and camera of your phone. And insofar as the Saudi state has contracted those actors to give them access to the software, they are able to use it against whomever they want. That basically means that anybody in the world, really, inside, outside of Saudi Arabia, could potentially be compromised, and their private conversations could be heard. Everything that they do, as long as it's in front of the camera, anything that's on their phone, is accessible to the government. Yeah, the NSO group has very insistently been making the claim that Israel has very strict laws against this kind of thing, and they only sell the software to governments when they're sure that it's going to be used to fight terrorism. Which you can define terrorism in a lot of interesting ways. I would say. I mean, if you're openly selling this product to the Saudi government and they define terrorism as things including like atheism and feminism, then that's not much of a defense. The fact that the the IDF is benefiting greatly from those digital resources here, obviously benefiting from the funds coming in from dictators around the world, not just Saudi Arabia, is an absolute outrage. And in connection to this development, we have been noticing an increase in arrests and disappearances of Saudi activists or Saudi social media users who hide behind anonymous accounts and pseudonyms and are supposed to be like they're not their identity is not supposed to be public. And before, there have been scandals about Saudi spies being employed at Twitter to uncover the phone numbers of activists. One very important campaign that we've worked on in the past was that involving Abdurrahman al-Sadhan, who was a Saudi Red Crescent worker who had made anonymous tweets about the situation of workers' rights in Saudi Arabia. He's been made to disappear and later on sentenced to 30 years in prison. if you are interested in looking more into that on the Saudi Diaspora YouTube page. We did upload the the full side session of the UN Human Rights Council regarding this specific incident, but since then, people like a number of anonymous social media activists have also unfortunately fallen victim to this trend. Anonymous social media activist Fatima Shawarib, she was arrested in September of 2020, facing charges related to expressing opinions on Twitter, advocating for the rights of detained activists. This is a little bit outside of this scope, but it is worth noting because, well, Manahal Notaibi was a 29-year-old athlete student who was essentially arrested because she was not walking in the traditional Saudi clothes, like the abaya. It was apparently like too revealing or scandalous in that sense, which is also I think a very important point for people to keep in mind, hold in relation that people from the country, people who are considered kind of tribal property of Saudi citizens, or don't have the same rights that foreign tourists do have. That is something that is very important to keep in mind. So yeah, and like another very important story that we should talk about is that of Hamad Al Ghamdi, who was also an anonymous social media user on X, formerly known as Twitter. Right, the guy has posted a few tweets, basically labeling the ruling family of Saudi Arabia as tyrants. There were a couple of tweets on an anonymous Twitter account with less than 10 followers, yeah. As a result, his identity was also somehow uncovered, Muhammad Al Ghamdi, and he was sentenced to death.
Yeah, I had another thought about the Saudi government slipping spies into Twitter. Do you ever wonder if they're also playing a role in who gets banned?
I would not hold it past them, and I like, although I haven't really look that much into it, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all because the
Yeah.
foreign governments have regularly had parts to play in decisions about bannings and things like that. Um,
Yeah, although I'm honestly more think it's more likely that Russia's doing it, not least because I got banned when some of their supporters mass reported me. But
I mean, we do know, like, there are basically troll farms that are operated by the Saudi state. That there are things like mass reporting coming from the side of state supporters, mass reportings and things like that. We know that that exists as well. There's even a term for it in Saudi Arabia. They call them digital flies, and yeah, so it is also a well documented phenomenon. If the United States is not setting any accountability for the South in that sense, Israel does not care about holding them accountable. Israel is all about, at this point, seemingly, licking their feet and begging them to please, please, please normalize relations with Israel and consider them a real country, and have them be an official ally and integrate them into this Middle Eastern sphere of influence.
well, I don't think it's quite like that. I think it's that they both have Iran as an enemy, and or at
I
least
mean,
the
that's part of
Islamic
it as well.
Republic, and that's scaring both of them. They need to work together.
I mean that's part of it as well. But I mean, the normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel is obviously a very contentious issue in Saudi society, and a lot of people, especially people who are more conservative, who have expressed criticism to that, have, yeah, have been cracked down upon, have been arrested, and have had to suffer some serious consequences for their opinions. Of course, you do have people who are in support of this normalization as well, and I personally think that there is a time and place and a proper context to normalize relations with Israel, and like on both sides, really. I mean, Saudi Arabia and Israel are entering into this public relationship finally, where they recognize each other. I guess Israel's always recognized Saudi Arabia, but they're entering into this relationship that's very visible to the public, and it is based on the one side Israel helping the South and repressing their own people, and on the other side the South kind of laying off the criticism that has to do with the treatment of Palestinians. And so, like, the basis of this normalization or quote unquote peace deal, which clearly it is not, it is based on all of the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? It's not about peace. It's not about people's uniting in solidarity or anything like that. What it is about is bolstering authoritarianism on both sides, and it is having major effects in that direction, and this is terrifying, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and let's face it, it's been decades since anyone in the Middle East, with the possible exception of Jordan, has cared about Palestinians.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, pretending to care might be better than not pretending to care, you know what I mean? Like, clearly Saudi Arabia
Eh,
hasn't taken Palestinian refugees or anything like that, but
maybe, but
they're
I
not even
find I
pretending to
find
care.
people who pretend to care to advance a political agenda to just be slimy.
Yeah, yeah, I get that, but if we're looking at the long-term effects on like geopolitics, I think that's, I don't know. I would rather have like this political context where the Souths are drawing attention to this as opposed to not. But yeah, I guess this is arguable in a
Yeah.
certain sense when they're not doing
Well,
anything about it anyway. But I
well, I
mean,
guess the Sauds are different in this front.
yeah,
Other people pretending to care so they can use Palestinians as cannon fodder. Sauds not so much.
I suppose, yeah. So yeah, I mean those public talks between Saudi Arabia, Israel, the Emirates. You have all of those Arab states kind of having those talks with Israel and getting security guarantees from the United States, and at the same time kind of getting the approval of Palestinian Authority representatives who everybody is speculating or going off of bribes and living luxurious lives in Qatar at this point and have zero legitimacy with the Palestinian people. And within this context, you have international media designating those developments as peace deals in the Middle East and kind of solutions to the Eastern conflict and the Israel question and all of that. And I think this is very likely a contributing factor to the more recent developments around Gaza, where those people are experiencing even more frustration. And hey, no, there's no peace. Nothing's getting better. Troops were taken away from the Gazan border to protect settlers in the West Bank. At this, nothing is moving forward, and obviously nobody is making excuses for the atrocities that are committed by Hamas, but
Oh, people
we
are.
can
You,
no,
we aren't. People are.
nobody in this room. Okay,
Yeah,
let's be, yeah,
yeah,
um let's be more specific in that sense. Yes, people are, but I think it's very important to pay attention to the kind of context in which this happened, and in which a lot of people are kind of pretending that this problem is being solved and Palestinians are being paid attention to, when the reality is that's clearly not the case.
yeah. And well, I guess we'll talk about it more when we cover Israel. But ultimately, if Israel wanted peace, they shouldn't have let settlers get away with all sorts of outrageous violence. Any settler who starts attacking Palestinian civilians in Palestinian territory should be sent to prison and then never allowed to go into the West Bank again.
Yeah,
But they won't do that.
I mean, it's a discussion for our next
Yeah,
episode for sure. But
yeah.
I would just say, like, my opinion, at least Israeli civilians should not be able to go to the West Bank at all. If we recognize this as Palestinian territory and we're serious about developing a two-state solution, but yeah, we can talk about this another time. In conclusion to today's discussion, I would just like to reiterate the amount of fear and terror that the Saudi people are living in now. That it is a more dangerous place, a far more dangerous place than it was 10 years ago. I don't think like 10 years ago anybody would seriously raise the fear or the risk of, hey, if I have my phone sitting next to me, somebody might be spying on me, and if I say something that's critical of the royal family, they might come here with it, like with an undercover ambulance, and throw me in there and make me disappear. Like, this was not a concern 10 years ago, it is a concern now. You don't even know what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say. Are you allowed to criticize Israel? Are you allowed to criticize the hadith, even though Mohammed bin Salman has said this has openly done this himself? But it's still a very sensitive topic. And apostasy is still a crime in Saudi Arabia, and it's still being prosecuted. So there was a religious scholar who was actually charged with apostasy for doubting certain hadiths in the last couple of years. My God, I mean, do excuse me that there are so many preachers in prison, so many intellectuals, so many speakers that their names kind of get mixed in together, and you have a hard time remembering some of them. But in any case, like this one religious scholar was, yeah, was essentially charged with apostasy a couple of years ago because he questioned certain hadiths, made criticisms of some supposed like companions of the Prophet, or in a specific like Shia versus Sunni kind of dispute, and has like really the main reason why he was charged with apostasy, let's be real, was because he was critical of the Saudi government. 10 years ago, you just follow the Wahhabi speaking points. You follow the lines that you're given. Music is forbidden. Movie theaters are forbidden. No women outside, no women driving, blah, blah, blah. All of that. Standard. We know what we're supposed to believe. You don't get into trouble unless you do something that you know is going to get you in trouble. Which is, yeah, by no means excusing this kind of system, but it's like, we don't even have that anymore. Nobody is safe. Anybody can disappear at any point in time. And yeah, it is far worse than it probably has ever been in that sense. I mean, within the reign of King Salman, more than double. Every year, almost double the number of people have been executed as opposed to previous years before King Salman came into power. There has been like one mass execution after another. Like, this does seem to have a small impact on public perceptions, because you have Cristiano Ronaldo, you have Messi, you have those big figures. You have Justin Bieber going there and performing, and those people are being offered deals that nobody else is able to offer, and they cannot refuse, right? I think that's something interesting, kind of funny, that apparently the reason why Messi refused to move to Saudi Arabia was because his wife was very opposed to the idea, even though it probably meant billions of dollars more for them. But yeah, after you have a certain amount of money, I mean, how much does your soul and integrity cost? I think is a very important question there, right?
I wouldn't put it past some of them to be virtue signaling by performing in the Middle East.
To be virtue signaling by performing in Saudi Arabia?
By performing somewhere in the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia is where it's safe for them to perform.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is even more fucked up, really.
Yeah, I mean, what are you like? What virtue are you signaling there? Like, that
You're
I like
showing
taking money
you're
from dictators and whitewashing crimes against humanity. Is that like?
No, I mean I think I wouldn't put it past some of them to think that by performing in the Middle East, they're showing acceptance of Middle Easterners, and not fully catching how they're whitewashing dictators.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, like with those tourism hotel industry, you see a lot of ads now. Come to Saudi Arabia. Those football stuff and games and so on. A lot of people are unaware of the political background of all of those developments. And quite honestly, this is something that I would very candidly say to my friends. I mean, if my government, because of my religious beliefs, because of my political expressions, if I cannot go back to my own home country, then I would probably hold it against you if you would do that. If you'd go and support the Saudi regime in that way and rehabilitate their image and give them money. Here's a mind blowing fact that just enrages me. You know, my Israeli friends were able to go to Saudi Arabia and are probably going to be, yes, safer there than I possibly could be. And I can't go there, but they can. You can, Ben, probably. Maybe not now after.
No, I'm definitely not after we've been friends. you
Yeah,
you told me I'm most certainly on their enemies list by now.
yeah.
Would I need to get a
Possible.
visa before going?
You would.
Okay, so I probably wouldn't get a visa.
I mean, at this point, with their like geopolitical kind of leverage that they have today, put them past them to target foreign journalists or anything of that caliber. So foreign journalists, of course, they've targeted people from Lebanon and Egypt and so on. I'm talking about people from the U.S. specifically, which would be a step higher. But you know, they've done things close to that. So yeah,
Well, that's another thing though. I suspect China can get away with using hostage diplomacy against the U.S. in a way Saudi Arabia probably couldn't.
No, because, well, Saudi Arabia is supposed to be an ally. They're working for those security guarantees. Hostage diplomacy would definitely not be in the cards there. I'm talking about, yeah,
Exactly.
something more like of a warning nature of a, hey, like, don't send your journalists here. We're gonna fuck them up. Here, they
Yeah.
spend a month in prison and we'll send them back all beaten up or whatever, and well, we've showed them a lesson that way. But who knows? Who knows? Let's not find
Oh,
out.
if I had the courage of certain Russian dissidents, I just might go just to do that.
Oh, just yeah, yeah. Don't do that, and there's no telling what could possibly happen.
Now, if I wanted to make a statement like that, I'd do it by demining Ukraine.
Yeah, or maybe they'll offer you some few $1 billion and you'll become a PR spokesperson for Saudi Arabia.
Nah, I can't lie that well.
Yeah. Yeah. In any case, I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover today, right? Our next project or our next episode is going to revolve around the current Palestine Israel conflict. Very notable thing I've been noticing is that like my social media feed has been incredibly polarized. I have like almost like a number of friends who are constantly posting things in solidarity with Palestine and partially some very questionably like inhuman things, anti-Israeli and so on. And I have people on the Israeli side who are also making this those unequivocal arguments about how, yeah, Israel has every right to do whatever it's doing to defend itself, to starve children, and all of that. And it doesn't seem like there is a middle ground for people to meet and discuss things reasonably and work towards a reasonable solution. Which is why we thought we would have people on who lived through the conflict personally, not necessarily the most recent one, but like the Israel conflict in general, and have a more nuanced perspective about, for example, Israelis speaking out against settlement expansion in the West Bank, and people who have warned against the efforts of Netanyahu to empower Hamas and keep the Palestinians divided and prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, and really the responsibility that the Israeli government has to carry. On the other side, of course, we would very much like to talk to Palestinians who can speak candidly about the rampant Islamism problem within areas of Palestine, especially in Gaza, with Hamas, the genocidal rhetoric and political lines that are coming out of those areas, which are really helping nobody. Yeah, how maybe we can work towards, I guess, a more moderate way of looking at those things on both sides. Maybe we'll have multiple episodes. We don't have everything completely set up yet. And so, if anybody has any suggestions, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information will, of course, be in the description here. So, thank you everybody so much for listening. Ben, do you have any last words?
No, except, well, conversations about Saudi Arabia make me wish I had a time machine.
Yeah, what would you do with that time machine?
Either tell the family that opposed the Sauds when the Ottomans were around
Oh, the
to turn against the
Rashidis?
Ottomans and take the Rashidis, and take the British money and guns instead of the Sauds, or just take a bunch of newspapers, go back in time, show them to the British, and say, "Let it collapse on its own. Don't help the Sauds,"
Yeah, I mean,
or get them to arm.
whether the British would be like happy with this future scenario where the Souths are this close allies and yeah, whatever. I don't know how
Nah,
the British
no,
would.
the suicide bombings that probably wouldn't have happened if the Sauds
Oh yeah,
never
yeah.
controlled.
Tell them about 9/11. Uh,
Yeah, and just arm the Shias to the teeth so they can control the oil underneath their own feet, and the Sauds can continue to be the lords of an irrelevant patch of desert no one cares about,
yeah.
and keep them out of, which would also keep them out of Mecca and Medina too, I believe.
Interestingly enough, if the Souths hadn't conquered the peninsula, it would probably be a number of different nations today. I
Yeah.
mean, the Rashidas would probably have had control over the central region, the Hijaz region. You would have had the Sharifs of Mecca, and they would have had their own state, and then yeah, in the east, you probably would have had Iranian aligned group or government. Who knows? I mean, alternate history is not our specialization, and it's not the it's not what people come here for.
And Mecca and Medina would be pluralistic and have most strains of Islam represented, and not instead of just the Wahhabis.
Yeah,
We would not
I
be
mean,
we would
interestingly
not be
enough,
having.
the Wahhabis were really never able to take over Mecca and Medina in the ideological sense of you still have Sufis there, you still have Shias there. I mean, they have a political dominance, but I mean the demographics have been surprisingly stubborn in a way. Yeah, so stay tuned for our next podcast episode, which is going to be about the Palestine Israel conflict that has been going on for the duration of this month now, which is coming to the end, the month of October 2023. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, and take care, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. Stay safe while the world goes mad.